everyone, and welcome to the latest and greatest episode of the Rumcast. I am John Gulla, here with Will Hookinga, and we are the co-hosts of this podcast that talk about all things rum-related with the people who love and shape it. We have another great interview lined up for today with the Cocktail Wonk himself, Mr. Matt Pietrek, who generously gave us the exclusive first chance to speak with him about a brand new book on rum that he and his wife, Carrie Smith, are releasing titled Modern Caribbean Rum. But first, Will, how are things going in Nashville for you this time of year?
They're good, John. You know, the leaves are changing colors. It's getting a little crisper outside. We have these things called seasons up here that I don't know if you've heard of them down there in Miami. But
I think we make this joke annually now.
I do,
but it's still relevant.
It's, you know, the changing of seasons is the time for traditions. So that's what we do here on the Rumcast. But yeah. I'm doing well. I wanted to quickly revisit something from a few episodes back. Listeners will probably remember we had our first ever Rumcast Fantasy Rum Draft a few episodes ago, and I think everyone will also remember those results where I had the resounding year one victory based on the voting of well over 100 listeners out there now. But there was one voting submission that was particularly different that I wanted to highlight really quickly here at the top of the show because the outcome was a little bit different. So past Rumcast guest, friend of the podcast, Lance Surajbali of thelonecaner.com, he took things to the next level as he often does.
As he is wont to do, yes.
Yes, he didn't settle for just voting via the Google form that everyone else did. He made his own spreadsheet with each of our picks all categorized, and then he went in and plugged in the scores he had given every rum that we selected on his website, The Lone Caner, from reviews. And he had scores for every single rum that we picked, some of which he hasn't reviewed yet, but he has scored. So anyway, the results were super interesting in that you won the majority of the categories. Like you had the higher score on the majority of the categories, but my picks had the higher average score. So my average score was 84, yours was 83. So by a nose, I won the averages, but you won the amount of categories, which I thought was interesting and which just goes to show, you know, even though the results looked a little lopsided, it was closer than that might have seemed. A razor's edge.
Never miss an opportunity to bring up that win again, do you, Will?
I just, you know, it's a great little spreadsheet. I'll publish a screenshot of the spreadsheet on the website for the post for this episode. So
it was very cool to see him do that. Very wonkish.
It was very wonkish, yeah. It's on theme for this episode.
Yeah,
so
I was to say, by the way, did you know the definition of a wonk prior to this? Because I'm going to be embarrassed to tell you that I kind of knew the idea of it, but like not the specifics.
Right.
So I actually had to look it up.
It was something I'd always heard associated with kind of like political commentary and stuff like that. So it was a word I was familiar with, yeah.
Right, which is in the definition, right?
Right. This word stuff is on brand for me as well right now because I've recently become obsessed with the New York Times crossword puzzle, which is something I've never been into historically. And I started doing them a few weeks ago, and I was absolutely horrible at them. I thought I was the stupidest person alive. I'm glad to say that persistence has paid off, and this week I've completed every single crossword puzzle of the week, and they get progressively harder. So yesterday I finished my first ever Saturday, and I'm just like on cloud 9 right now. And I've also noticed there's quite a few clues where rum knowledge comes in handy. There was one clue that was about, it was like sugar refinery byproduct. And I was like, boom, molasses.
Molasses, done.
And then there was another one that I think it was Bacardi when in Mexico. And I was like, Ron. And that was exactly right. So rum knowledge coming into play. But you know, all that's neither here nor there. Just had to, if there are any other crossword geeks out there, send me an email because I'd love to geek out on it with you, or wonk out, I should say. But anyway, how have you been, John?
I'm doing okay, and thankful for a lot of opportunities to share some of my rum collection recently, actually.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, we had some people over this week, and my wife's extended family, and wonderful people, many of whom are Hispanic or Latin in their background, primarily Spanish-speaking. So I have to sharpen up on my language skills a little bit also in order to share with them. But this isn't the first time I've met them. We've met them and talked about rum in other households in the area in Miami, and this is the first time they came to our house. So, of course, I was very enthused to share because we had talked about rum, and shared some Bacardi, which was in another person's house last time. But I wanted to share some of my collection with them. So, as you might
Always
imagine,
the right thing to do.
As I'm working through my, broken Spanish / they also speak a little bit of English, so it was this kind of, back and forth. And I poured them some of the Samaroli Caribbean blend I've talked about on the show here before, which is primarily Cuban, primarily a Cuban rum, column distilled, no added sugar, and one I really enjoy. So I poured this for them, and it was interesting. They were very polite. They expressed that they could taste the quality of the spirit as I was talking about it. But their main feedback was that it was both very dry and hot.
Okay.
And so it's only 43%. I say only for us.
Yeah.
But, I'm not sure they really enjoyed it.
Wow. Well,
so I was thinking about this, and as they were telling me, I'm thinking, given their kind of cultural background, they're looking for something sweeter. So I was given the opportunity later to try to, let's go with one more. And I'm looking for something in my cabinet that I knew was sweeter, which, of course, I don't have a whole lot of.
Yeah.
But, and I also didn't want to just try to find something that's kind of the lowest common denominator either.
Right.
Something different. So I had a bottle way in the back of Plantation's Peru 2010.
Okay.
And I don't know if you're familiar with that one, Will. That one's finished in Pinot de Charente casks.
Maybe I tried that at some time or another.
Okay. And I know that one's dosed some. I think it's 8 grams per liter. And I figured maybe that's something that is a little on the sweeter side, but not super sweet that I could get them hooked on. So I poured that. I talked about it a little bit. Very interested in that one. And, that one didn't really fly with them either.
Okay.
So I utterly
Maybe
failed.
rum is not for them.
Well, no, but here's the thing. They expressed a love for rum. But again, I wanted to go back, and the reason I wanted to kind of talk about this with you is just a little bit of, number one, I totally flunked here. I failed this test because I didn't get there with them to try to bring them to some different styles of rum from where I knew their background was with it. And two is that their perception of what they wanted in a rum was they wanted it sweeter. And I mean far sweeter, really. So, and that's not something that should be unknown to us, right? Because, there are people out there that they want their rum to be dessert sweet. So, that was just a kind of an eye-opener for me, I guess, in a little bit. I'm still digesting it because it was literally last night. So I was thinking about, man, how could I have done a better job of maybe getting them something that they would enjoy, but also kind of exploring the space a little bit. And, obviously you don't have everything in your collection that you would want at every given time. So I don't know. I was just kind of still trying to process and digest how that went. It wasn't awful. I mean, they were very nice about it, but you could tell that they didn't get there. So, I'm still...
It saddens me slightly, I won't lie. Just because, I mean, I feel like... If your experience with rum is to the extent to where it's so sweet that even when you have a rum that is lightly sweetened, it doesn't taste right to you.
Yeah.
That's the side of it that also is kind of it just kind of deflates me a little bit. And that if your perception of rum is so heavily sweetened, and I don't know the friends you're talking to, and maybe it was just a case that it wasn't just the sweetness; they just didn't like those rums. That's possible too.
It could be, yeah.
I don't know. When you are so into rum and you want people to like it, and it's they need it so sweet, it's oh yeah,
yeah. The only other thing I pointed to in my head that night was I'm giving them a neat spirit, and maybe. In a Glencairn, and that's the way I enjoy it. So I've tried to push that, to them to really get the essence of the spirit rather than, anything else. But number one, I should have asked them if they wanted it on the rocks.
Okay. So you don't know if they were neat spirit drinkers?
Well, I mean, they said they were. And again, going back to my experience previously with them, we had done that with some Bacardi. And they were fine. So that's part of it maybe as well. And I can't remember what the ABV on the Peru is, but I want to say it's also was higher than 40%. So maybe it's that combined with being neat and just, not sweetened as much that maybe did it. But again, nothing. It wasn't like a total destruction, like this is swill and garbage and like I can't even finish it type of thing. It was just more like you could tell that this wasn't for them, and that did, like you said, it saddened me a little bit. I guess I'm just searching at this point for it.
I mean, you gave them 2 rums and they didn't like them. I mean, that's not a huge deal
fair.
At the end of the day.
That's fair. I didn't have too many cracks at it either, just 2. So, but yeah. So, anyways, I thought it was interesting not only from that perspective of trying to get rums to different people, but also because of the categorizations of rums and even the diversity of rums, even within the Caribbean.
Yeah.
So, I feel like that's as good a segue as any here to shifting to talk about Matt's new book. And I know we were excited to talk to him about it.
I don't even know. I don't think Peru would qualify for his new book if I'm remembering my maps correctly.
Fair. Well, I was thinking Cuba, but you're right. I forgot Peru doesn't count for that.
So, yeah, on that note, Matt's new book is called Modern Caribbean Rum. And I think the subtitle really gives a very accurate description of what the book is. It's a contemporary reference to the region's essential spirit. So my understanding of the book, I haven't read the book. Matt sent me a few samples going in. It's coming out the week that we will release this episode. So you'll be able to get it. We'll put links into in the show notes to where you can find it and all that good stuff. But it's essentially a snapshot of the standing of rum throughout the Caribbean right now. So what's out there, how it's made, a little bit of background information, but Matt is very clear that this is not a history book. But I think what it's going to serve as for decades to come is, like, if you want to know what the state of Caribbean rum was like around this time period right now, this will tell you just about everything you need to know. It's 850 pages. And like we were just saying there, the focus is Caribbean rum. As Matt gets into in the interview, if it was all rum, it probably would have been 2,000 pages or something like that. So I'm really excited to get my hands on it. I know we've said on the podcast many times that his website, Cocktail Wonk, is kind of an essential rum reference for us all the time. Anytime I'm interviewing someone from somewhere, if he has written about that place, I'm reading back through all the articles. Half the time I need to remember or something like, which mark comes from which distillery. I'm always going to his website. So it's really this kind of invaluable rum reference for everyone in the rum world. And I think this book is going to be that taken, up several notches.
Yeah, I love we got to see a couple of preview pages of it, and it looks fantastic, both in the layout of it and also just the depth and the extent of the information for each of the distilleries seems fantastic. So I, like you, can't wait to get one and rifle through it and then start reading in depth.
Yeah, and as you were saying, there's tons of photographs and things like that. So yeah, I really just think it's going to be one of those books that when people want to know more about rum, you recommend it to them. So I'm excited to get a copy. And in the interview, Matt really took us into the making of the book, and tons of fascinating little snippets about the research process and everything, and also a little bit just about his own story. If you're not familiar with how Matt got started writing about rum and kind of went from having a long career in software to now a full-time career in rum, it's pretty interesting stuff. So I'm excited for people to hear this and to check out the book.
Yeah, same here. So why don't we take a very short break and we'll see you on the other side with Matt.
Hey Rumcasters, this episode of the show is sponsored by Down Island Spirits, a brand new independent rum bottler that has just launched the first releases in its single cask rum series in the US. The founders of Down Island Spirits started the brand to solve a problem many of us rum enthusiasts are all too familiar with. So many of the incredible rums they encountered while traveling the Caribbean for the past 25 years were sadly not available back home. Down Island's single cask rum series aims to change that. You can check out and order the initial 4 releases at downislandspirits.com. These releases include everything from a 20-year-old 100% pot still rum distilled at Foursquare Distillery in Barbados to big, bold rums distilled at some of our favorite Jamaican distilleries. Oh, and one more thing. They're all cask strength and they're all free of additives. So again, go to downislandspirits.com to order yours now. And while you're at it, follow them on Instagram and Facebook to keep up with future releases. Now back to the show. All right, we are here finally with Matt Pietrek of CocktailWonk.com. Matt, I feel like it might have been as long as 2 years ago that I was first like, hey, you should come on the podcast sometime. Yeah. You know, what have you got going on? What are you working on that's exciting that would be fun to talk about? Because I knew you're always up to something new. And you kind of mentioned that you were working on a book, and it sounded like it was going to be a big deal, a very big book. And I guess around 2 years have gone by. 850 pages later, you're ready to share with the world what's been consuming a lot of your time for the past couple of years, or maybe longer than that. I don't know if you were working on it before that as well, but I know you're waiting on the first copies to arrive. You were just telling us about that before we started recording. How does it feel to finally be at this point of being done, essentially, with the actual working on the book? Now comes like the other side of the thing, which is spreading the word, getting people to buy the book and everything. But how does it feel to be done with the writing and get to talk about it?
Well, first off, thank you guys for having me on. Of course. It has been a while, and I'm glad I'm finally able to do this. I was actually done pretty much at the end of August. We set a target date to the end of July, and of course, nothing runs exactly according to plan. But by end of August, both me and my wife Carrie, who's co-author, we were done. I mean, I actually finished writing it last December 30th of last year. Like I said, there's no more chapters. There's no more creating to do. It's now entirely polishing them up, and that polishing it up took half a year.
What did you have a hard deadline of yourself? Like, I'm gonna be done writing by the end of 2021.
That's probably what it was, right?
Yeah, I wanted to be done, and I hit it. Like I said, it was something I started 3 years. I mean, planning 7 years ago and started writing in earnest 3 years ago after we arrived here in New Orleans. We had just launched Minimalist Tiki, and now it's like, okay, that's out there. We're selling that. Time to start the rum book. And
I was going to say, did you take like a breath in between finishing that book and getting it out?
Yeah. I mean, it's true. In the sense that promoting and shipping Minimalist Tiki was sort of like, it's not mentally taxing, it's work and packing boxes and all that kind of stuff. But it was sort of like, there was no mental energy going into that.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I sort of took some time, and I had a note outline from a few years prior, and basically took it out, revised it, and and at that point I was like, I thought I knew how to write this 7 years ago, and I didn't. There was so much work, and throughout the process, it's been like, I had no idea about that because that goes in, and so I think by the end of as we got into 2020, right as the pandemic was starting, I was like, okay, I've got more here than I know what to do with. And so I started like clamping it down, no more adding anything to it. And we still blew well past the page count we were shooting for. But like I said, it was 6 months of just like all the little things, editing, re-editing. I've read it so many times, and getting other people, editors involved, and getting domain experts to do the final reviews. I mean, I tried to do that a lot as we were going. Yes, I was finishing a chapter, but that doesn't always work. And so there was like at the end, it's like, okay, I have all these chapters. Like, let's get this person to read these 4 chapters, and this person to read these 3 chapters. And I think we'll probably talk about this later, but just like the photo editing and the selection, and like, oh crap, we don't have a photo for this. How can we get one? It was still a creative scramble, even though I was no longer writing it. But yes, come like August 31st, it was like weird. The moment when we sent it off in printer, with the first of three very large payments to print it. It was an enormous sigh of relief. So
yeah, a sigh and a gulp, huh?
yeah, the sigh and a gulp. It was like, we knew how much it cost to print minimalist tiki, and it's just like wow, we couldn't buy a pretty nice car for $1. You send me out to get this printed. So but it was a leap. So, and we're actually printing more the first time around than we did for minimalist tiki.
You said 850 pages. I don't think most people read that much in a few years, and you're writing that. That's a pretty big volume too. So you're printing a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, it's 850 pages and and 950 images throughout it. Wow. But it's not a picture book. I don't want anybody to think like, oh, it's just all pictures. Like, no, there's I counted it. There's 174,000 words in this thing, and so. It's about 300 words a page. So, and I know it's that count because I literally once it was all assembled, I took the PDF, exported it to Microsoft Word, and then spell checked 174,000 words in Microsoft Word.
A lot of ignore alls, I bet.
A lot of add to dictionaries, ignore alls. It ran Grammarly across it, and we had other professional editors, and it's a lot of writing. It's surprising. Some of the chapters I thought would be super long aren't, and some of the ones that I didn't think were long are going to be like, wow, there's 50 pages on this. Who knew? So
yeah. Well, I know we're going to talk a lot more about that, but I wanted to kind of take a journey back in time first a little bit as we're talking to you, and I think most of our listeners for sure are going to know you and what you do, but probably may not know that once upon a time, you were a software engineer for Microsoft and a few other companies. And I just have this image. I'm thinking, like, how did you make the transition from what sounds to me like a very straightforward and like conservative desk job to wearing tiki shirts every day, jetting from country to country, and obsessing over rum and writing about it?
We need the origin story.
Yeah. The origin, exactly.
Yeah, so the origin story, I would say, is that I started working for Microsoft in 2004, and I was in software for 30 years, and started back in the late 80s. And a lot of the origin story back in from 93 to 96, I actually wrote 2.5 books on how the internals of Microsoft Windows. How
those actually still come up on Google if you do some Googling for Matt Pietrek.
I couldn't imagine a further topic from like rum than like Microsoft Windows. So
exactly. But it was there I sort of got this notion of like, well, hey, there's this, Windows, if you're programming Windows, you call functions to do things, and you're like, well, that didn't work the way I expected. Why not? You're like, well, you can either I don't know, or you can, you're like, well, let's go find out. There are ways to literally disassemble code, to literally take the binary files, rip them apart, and look at the instructions. And they're like, oh, okay, now I see what it's doing. And I know that was sort of the beginning of my, like, if I don't know and nobody will tell me, I'm just going to go figure it out on my own.
Yeah.
And so, so that was sort of my gig, for many years with software. It's just like rip it apart, see what's in there, and then re-explain it to people in a understandable way.
Gotcha.
So I did that for a number of years. By 2004, I found myself at Microsoft, and I had moved to Seattle. I met some friends, a couple of friends, and they were making cocktails. And it was like, nothing super amazing, but they're like, wow, you have your glasses in the freezer. You have good eyes. Like when you go to make a daiquiri, you're not taking out the bottle of wine juice, you're squeezing it. Oh, that's kind of cool. I can do this. And I started perfecting the Greyhound, all things. But
I don't even know what a Greyhound is.
It's basically gin and grapefruit.
Okay.
And I sort of intrigued by that. And in 2007, we bought a house overlooking Lake Washington, and we had a little spot. I mean, there was a pool outside, so there was this little right inside the door. There was this kind of an old like 50s era bar, like metal countertops, some metal shelves, and a sink. And Carrie and I said, like, yeah, kind of cool. Like, down to cocktails, like you could have this space.
Right.
If you have minimalist tiki, there's actually a picture of it beginning minimalist tiki. And so, it's maybe, 6 feet wide, 2 feet deep, got some nice wood counters over top. And like, well, this will be the most amazing bar I'll ever need. And as anybody with a rum collection knows, you soon blow past that. And well, we blew past the rest of it. How we imported rum bottles are now in the office. And yeah, you know. But yeah, I started playing around there. And one of the things I found out is I like tiki drinks and love the Mai Tai. Love the origins. I love the taste of the Mai Tai. Just it was this great romantic name, but I didn't know a whole lot about it. And then when we renovated the house, my wife Carrie had given me Jeff Berry's book. It was Sippin' Safari, and I read through it. And it's like we're living in an apartment, waiting for the house to be put together. Living in an apartment, I'm flipping through there, and I'm like, oh, okay. I didn't know tiki was actually invented like in L.A. and Oakland,
right?
And what are all these rums? It's like Demerara rum, Jamaican rum, and like I don't see these at our state liquor stores. Okay, so we can go travel, go somewhere else in the U.S., go to Europe, bring back. Oh, here's the Jamaican rum. Let me bring them back. And so that started to be down that path, and then sort of grew, and at some point Instagram comes along, start posting some photos or whatever, and somewhere in there, my wife said, I love you, honey, but you need to stop telling me everything. You need to go tell other people about that. And go write again. Because I'd written about windows and had written columns and all this kind of stuff. Go write again. I'm like, no, I don't want it. I thought about it. And eventually okay, I'm not going to do it until I can know what makes me unique? What am I going to do different from other people out there? And then one night it sort of came to me as Cocktail Wonk. Oh, I'm going to do wonky stuff about cocktails. We're going to have fun with it. We're going to have recipes and explain things, but we're also going to have a sort of a geekier side. The rest of the wonk cocktail. So that started in circa 2013. Start putting articles up there. At some point, rum and tiki starts taking over more and more of the site. At some point, Cocktail Wonk is really a rum blog in disguise. But yeah, that was sort of, I sort of grew into it. Friends sort of took me into it. And then the more I did it, the more I'm like, wait, there's things I don't know here about this. And I remember one story in particular that sort of hold on a minute here, was there was this new rum, it was Denizens Merchants Reserve. Right. And I somehow got in contact with the guy who'd started the brand, and we did a phone interview. It's it's a big deal. A brand owner's actually going to talk to me on the phone. Wow, I'm making a name for myself here. And we started chatting on the phone. He's telling me about it. Blend of rum, some bees, this story. Oh, really? And go to his stories. And he's like, well, it's blended in Amsterdam by Ian H. Here.
Who?
What?
Yeah.
Tell me more about this. And he starts explaining it, and I'm like, oh, hold up here. And, and again, this was one of those moments where you're like, okay, down the rabbit hole. I'm full and I can't find anything online, very little. And well, shit, okay, how do I figure this out?
Yeah.
And I guess through my in this particular case, through my writing, I somehow got in contact with Carson from E&H here, and he said, next time you're over, we'll show you around.
Stop on by.
So you had to point me over there quickly thereafter. But yeah, it was just sort of, like I said, there's so much that once you start looking around, so much okay, there's no good explanation here. Yeah. There's very little sort of original first person or original source reporting on stuff. And I'm like, okay, I could do that. And, that's sort of become my ethos ever since.
At what point, we always like to imagine that there's some specific moment where you're like, aha, I could actually make a career out of this and do it for a living. A lot of times it's not just one moment, but around what was going on when you did start to think maybe I could, transition out of working in software and work in rum all the time.
Yeah. Good question. All credit goes to Peter Holland, Floating Rum Shack. That
another guest of the podcast.
Yeah, he was like, wait, what's this? He's Floating Rum Shack or whatever. And one day he's like, well, we're taking a leap. Whatever his words were, we're taking a leap. I'm going we don't know what the future holds. But I'm like, man, I don't want to do that. So, but I'm not quite old enough. We haven't saved enough money yet. Seattle's expensive, but but it was sort of that first inkling. I mean, and we knew about Ian Burrell, but he is a whole separate thing. Yeah. But no, this is a fellow rum nerd myself deciding to go.
So it was envy that started.
it was a little envy, yeah. But at some point, I kept going, and I'm like, found myself like, getting up in the morning, not thinking about what I want to do at work today, but thinking about what I'm going to do after work when I get home.
Yeah.
And that, and my wife was traveling all the time. So like I had lots of evenings myself, and I can either go sit on the couch and watch movies, or I can go and keep researching and writing about rum. And at some point it was like, it was starting around 2017 or so. I was like, man, this is like, I really don't want to go to work today. Like, I like, what I'm doing is cool, but I really just want to stay home and research and write about rum. And then, and then it was a point in 2017, my son passed away, and that was sort of that inflection point of like, well, we're not waiting around for anything anymore. Not waiting for him to graduate from college or anything like that. Like, well, my wife and I ever looked at each other like, are we happy doing what we're doing? Is there something we'd rather do? Yeah. And it was this moment, I think it's this moment of clarity where we said, we'd rather, like, we have lots of money, but we don't have the time to enjoy it. And so we can flip it around and say, we can have all the time we want and we don't have money, but maybe that's a better deal. And if we do it right, maybe we could find some sort of happy medium where, we're not living, the extravagant lifestyle like we were before, but damn it, like we get up when we want to, we do what we want to do. And I will tell you, I work harder than I've ever worked, but it's on my terms. That's because I want to do it because it's helping grow our company, our business, or whatever. So
taking a leap like that is always interesting to hear how that comes about. And I guess what Minimalist Tiki would have been just within a year or so. Was that 2018?
Yeah. So what happened is my son passed away in 2017. By middle 2018, we had decided we were going to list our house for sale. We didn't know where we were going just yet. We didn't know we'd end up in New Orleans, but we know we'd go somewhere, put our house up for sale, put the rest of what we didn't put in storage, put in moving van, moved across the water to Kingston, Washington. And within a week, I had started writing Minimalist Tiki, and we finished it. And there was another project yet to be, which I don't tell you about yet. It's all in way of the future, but another project that in there I also did.
It's floating around in there.
Yeah. But 6 months later, in April of 2019, we sent off the manuscript to the publisher or to the printer. We got in the car and we drove to New Orleans. But so yes, Minimalist Tiki was a 6-month process. And we were lucky in that we had a good friend who was a graphics designer who knew how to use InDesign, who did most of the layout with Carrie watching her, basically learning from her. So this time around, she did everything. So literally her first book she's ever done was 850 pages. So all credit goes to her for that. So.
Yeah, that's quite the project to start with. And I guess in case people haven't picked up on it yet, Minimalist Tiki basically all self-published. And you were alluding to with the new book, paying out all that money to go have it printed. You're not going through a big traditional publishing house for this and getting a big advance. It's more like literally like launching a product, basically.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. It was actually a guy named Chuck Calvary, the whiskey space. Chuck's is an old whiskey writer, and he was the one who told us like self-publishing is the way to go. And and I had written books before. I had written them for Windows. Yeah. And I looked around and the model hasn't changed much. That, for thinking of basically the publishing company pays you 10 to 15% of their wholesale price of the book. The wholesale price of the book is about 50%. 10 to 50% of 50% is around 6 or 7%. Guess what? For a $30 book, you're going to make $1.80. And you're like, okay, so let's say that sells really well. It sells 10,000 copies. That's $18,000, but you work for a year on that.
Right.
I could make more money working at in some service to your job. So that was a no. And so we looked at the cost to self-publish. It was basically like, you do everything. You literally do everything up to the point where you're like, here's a finished PDF that is in printer-ready format for these big commercial printers. And then we're like, well, it's going to be a lot of money to print. well, we've just sold our house, so we have some money.
There you go.
It's an investment, and we did it. And then like once that happens, it's like they go to the printer, and then they don't magically go to customers. You get books back,
Right?
So when right after we moved to New Orleans, we received 5,000 pounds of books on 3 pallets. Needed to find storage space for them, and then we start selling it. And then every day, like, oh look, we got 5 orders. Okay, time to go put them in a box, put a label on it. Like, we do literally everything.
Yeah.
But in exchange for that, like, more of the profit or most of the profit comes to us rather than going to publisher, Amazon, what have you. So we sort of took on a much larger task, but the financial reward has been much greater. So we've I will tell you that Carrie will openly admit that she thought we'd print 1,500 copies and still have 1,000 copies in the garage. Well,
you've gone through multiple printings,
we're at our
right?
6th printing now.
Yeah.
So it sort of proved it can be done. When we fight I can't find your book on Amazon. I'm like, I know, so we can't afford to sell it on Amazon. But the trick is that. I have the social media following and the connections where you're like, I can promote this book myself, that I don't need a publisher to go out there, hire a publisher to go try to put it in the bookstore and then forget to promote it or whatever. It's like, no, these books succeed or fall entirely on our efforts. And so we're willing to take that risk.
Well, on the note of the new book, which we should get around to discussing at some point, it's called Modern Caribbean Rum. And the way I was thinking about this before we, set up this conversation, and just based on what I knew about the book, I knew you had Minimalist Tiki, which obviously, based on the title, is very focused on tiki and cocktails, although there is a really great section on rum in that book. Kind of like how I've always told people historically that Smuggler's Cove is a great book, even if you just want to learn about rum, because of the rum section. I felt similarly about Minimalist Tiki. This book, on the other hand, is entirely focused on rum. But I also think saying you have a book about rum can mean a lot of different things. There's tons of different aspects, styles, countries you could explore. We always talk about how rum is the world's most diverse spirit. You can find it all over the place. So what did you choose to focus on with the book? And if you're introducing it to people, how do you explain the concept of it?
The title is very reflective of what's in the book. I said with the 850 pages, believe it or not, we had to filter down. Otherwise, it would be even bigger than it was.
Yeah.
And so each word in the title is important. First, modern. So it's a book about the modern rum industry. It's not a history book. There are elements of history in it. I use history to tell the story of today's rum industry, like how we got to this point. But it's not a history book. So it's not at all what, for example, like what Wayne Curtis's book is about, or about what Ian Williams' book is about. Not a history book. Caribbean, and I think that's the word people will gloss over, but it's Caribbean because that's the focus. There's certainly aspects of rum which are applied to all rum made no matter where. But really, it took me 850 pages to do justice to the Caribbean. Elsewhere, I'm trying to do in the United States and elsewhere, you're like, oh man, no, I would never finish this book. So it's intentionally limited. And there will be some people like, well, why is Mexico not in there? Why is this country? Why is Australia? Steve Marguerite's like, why is Australia not in there? Like, I don't know. But if you manage to get Australia into the Caribbean, then yeah. But yeah, it's focused on Caribbean. And then it's rum. And again, it's rum. It's not cachaça, Claire, it's not Grog, it's not all these other things. I have no disrespect whatsoever to those other things. But again, scoping is already 850 pages. So we had to deliberately say, like, we're not going to do Brazil cachaça. It's a great spirit, but it warrants its own book in and of itself. And we're not going to do, like the Mexican cane spirits. We're not going to do America. We're not going to do Australia. To focus on here. With that in mind, as well, this is also very much unlike a book like, say, Fred Minnick's or Dave Froome's. I can tell you right now, in that 850 pages, there are exactly 0 tasting notes. There are no reviews. There's no how does this rum taste like whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's intentionally focused on the producers, the people in the companies making the rum, not the brands.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I had to go around and around, with a lot of the people who work for brands, like, can you say this about the brand? And you're like, well, it's not really about the brand. Like, it's not really about El Dorado and how great El Dorado is, or what's El Dorado's expressions. And I love El Dorado, but it's not about that. It's about Demerara Distillers, and I'll say Demerara Distillers makes El Dorado rum and diamond, but it's not about the El Dorado expression. And so, with that said, about the first third or so of the book is applies to all rums. So about the first 250 pages are applicable to everything. Mm-hmm. That there are chapters on rum history. There's chapters on fermentation. Source material. You talk a lot about sugarcane. Source material, fermentation, distillation, aging, blending, rum flavor science. Each gets their own dedicated chapter. So, whereas in most books, I won't name any names, but most books, they'll dedicate like maybe 5 pages or 10 pages and cover rum making within the context of a chapter. Here, we literally have I'm going to just do as much as makes sense on sugarcane. And we're going to talk about sugarcane breeding. We're going to talk about the difference between cane juice versus cane syrup versus molasses. Talk about high test molasses. We're going to talk about the chemistry of molasses. Mm-hmm. Same with fermentation. We're going to talk about fermentation. We're going to talk about yeast varietals. We're going to talk about different fermentation techniques. We're going to talk about cane acid, dunder, muck, how they influence the flavor. Chemically, what do they do?
Yeah.
The level of detail that you'd find on topics on the various articles I've done on my site, I'm going to take those and turn them up to 11 on each and every little individual topic.
Right.
And it's funny, if you think about it, I never actually wrote that much about rum making, focused on here's the Cocktail Wonk series on rum making.
Right.
Part of that was because I'm saving it for the book, where I'm just going to do it all once and hopefully make a reference guide. So that's the first two sections there. And the third section, we kind of get into the business of rum, which very few books talk about. So we're going to talk about brands, talk about the difference between original producer brands, independent bottler brands, private label brands, why they're different, how some companies straddle this sort of thing. How do you identify which brand, what, if you pick a brand, what style is it? And from that, you can kind of learn what to expect from this brand, what you will see in their bottlings. There's a chapter on, for example, the West Indies Rum and Spirits Producers Association, which I, am the community envoy for. Mm-hmm. A whole lot of history there about recent history that's actually incredibly valuable for knowing what happened with rum over the last 30 or 40 years. And the story has never really been told. And I was really honored to be able to tell that story. There's a whole chapter on, basically I call it what you don't understand about Spanish heritage rum. Something that a lot of people dump on, the Spanish heritage style. It's well, it's not funky like Jamaican. It's not this. It's not the gas strength. And it's having spent a lot of time looking at all aspects of production in Panama, Nicaragua, Venezuela, Cuba, Puerto Rico, you go oh, it's a thing. They have their way of making rum. They have their tradition. They're not going to go chase something different. And there's a whole lot of stuff you don't understand about Spanish heritage rum. And I'm going to lay it all out there in a consistent format. Similarly, there's a chapter on the French. How the French, we think of Martinique and Guadeloupe. We don't really think, at least here in America, we don't really think about Reunion Island. But Reunion Island outproduces Martinique or Guadeloupe. And that, you start going Martinique is, cane juice rum, but Guadeloupe is still making more molasses rum than cane juice rum. We're just not hearing about that molasses rum. And in fact, if you look at Reunion Island, Martinique, Guadeloupe together, the large majority of French rum made today is actually from molasses, but we think of it as cane juice. So sort of going behind the scenes there. And also the fact that they all have GIs or, various levels of GI. Yeah. And they are all kind of similar. They're all kind of managed similarly. They're all sort of under French government control. There's a whole chapter on that, what you don't sort of going behind the scenes of the French rum industry.
So you did venture a little bit outside of the Caribbean to talk a little about Reunion.
Yeah. Just within the context of
right.
Yeah, fair point. There's a very large chapter on rum regulations. When this book is out, I don't want to hear anybody ever again say that rum has no rules, because I have laid them all out for you over, I think, 50 pages, literally country by country, regulation by regulation. There's charts. I've dug up the GIs and the rum regulations for countries people don't realize they had them. So there's an insane amount of background and GIs.
You should take out just that chapter and publish a little miniature guide to the rules of rum and just put that out there. So you can just hold that up as a book.
And stick it onto the door of some certain distilleries.
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, and there's more, I'm sure I'm forgetting chapter, but basically you get through all that. So that's like part 3. And then part 4, country by country, distillery by distillery.
Yeah.
Walking through. If you've seen any of my read any of my Cocktail Wonk, I went to Mount Gay and here's how Mount Gay makes their rum. Oh, I went to Appleton. Here's how Appleton makes rum. It's literally that style, that in-depth, sort of very production oriented. Each country is a chapter. So, Barbados, Jamaica, Trinidad, Guyana, Venezuela, Cuba, Puerto Rico, Martinique, Guadeloupe. 20 in total. Yeah. As much as possible. I tried to not leave anybody out. A few countries or islands didn't bother to get back to me whatsoever. But in general, over 500 pages devoted to rum making in the Caribbean. So over 70 distilleries have some decent level of detail about them, with lots of photos and lots of photos and information. Even the hardcore people will be surprised by.
Did you have a specific format that you went country by country by? And did that create a challenge for you? Or were there more challenging countries or topics to kind of cover?
So as a former software guy, this is, I think, in schema, this is how we do it.
Yeah.
And,
right.
I went a lot of effort to standardize the information so that I wasn't giving an incomplete picture. And it also, by having the standard format for what I was trying to do, it let me realize what I didn't know and that I should go find out. So every country's just the beginning of every country chapter has list all the producers that I'm aware of that I can find information on, and goes through a little bit of that country's history and their style of rum where applicable. And then each distillery also has a very consistent format where there's big picture of the distillery, key information about the distillery, like who owns it, how much they make, how much rum they make every year, what their distillation type is, what source materials they work with. And then once you get into a particular distillery, there's always a little background on the distillery and the company, and then the production part always goes through consistently. Like source material, fermentation, distillation, aging, blending, bottling. Yeah. So I have this sort of pattern that repeats over and over again. Let me.
So it's like an element of index or reference even there because of that format and the ability to scan through those and do that. I think because it includes that now. Are we allowed to call it a tome? Is it officially a tome?
You call it whatever you'd like. It is. Yeah, I mean, it is. It is. I think will be a reference for a lot of it's a big, it's a heavy book, but yeah, I wanted to make it fairly easy to somebody I really want to know about say Mount Gay's fermentation. Right. I know where to go for Barbados chapter. I know to go to Mount Gay. I know to look at this section. There it is.
What I'm looking forward to doing is I want to put it next. I'm looking over here off to the side because it's sitting over there. I want to put it next to Stephen Meyer's Coroni book and see which one is bigger between his 2 volumes and your one 850-page volume.
Yeah. Oh yeah, so it's just funny. I actually my friends with Stephen, and I have the Coroni book. I will say Stephen's is physically larger and has more pages. I will say mine is the largest consumer rum book ever published. Whereas Stephen's is a great book, but it's focused on one distillery.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So and sort of, and it's also kind of a different approach. Like Stephen, a lot of what's in the book is sort of this is my journey to figuring out all the stuff about Jeremy, and here's all the independent bottlers and this
breaking down every bottle and everything like that. Yeah.
Now one like I said, I thought the book. I'm happy to pay for the book. I was commiserating with Stefan because when he was in the final legs of getting it done, we were chatting, and I'm like 4 or 5 months behind you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm very happy that we ended up with one volume. It's like, if it would have been we actually did think about splitting it up into 2 volumes.
Yeah.
But at some point, like when we rounded 600 pages, we're like, shit, we're still more to go. They're like, okay, there's literally material we cut. There are chapters we cut from this book to keep it down to the 150 pages.
So you listed off a lot of the countries there. I think a lot of people will go into this book expecting to learn some interesting stuff about, Jamaican rum, Barbados rum, Guyana, Martinique, like the first kind of big countries, not by size, but just by rum reputation that you think of. What are a few countries or maybe even rum making traditions that you think will be surprisingly fascinating to people? Maybe places they don't know as much about or haven't had as much rum from, but that are surprisingly interesting.
So I'll sort of answer a related question and on the way to the answer. Probably the most difficult chapter was Cuba.
Yeah.
They don't talk a whole lot. And people go like, oh, well, there's Havana Club, right? And like, there's the Havana Club distillery. That's all I need to know, right? Wrong. Mm-hmm. There's so much more to the Cuban rum industry that people don't realize. And
incorrecto, we would say.
I needed to look up some stuff about Havana Club the other day, and as I often do, found my way to your Havana Club article. And as I was going through it, I was just like, Jesus, this is so much more complicated than I thought it would be.
And what I've learned is that article didn't even know half of what I learned since then. So, like in in those articles, they'll talk about Cuba rum. Like, okay, yeah, Cuba rum. And you can go find a Cuba rum site, and you're like, oh, here are the 4 distilleries. Like, okay, now I have insider information on Cuba, right? Wrong. There's actually more like 10 or 12 distilleries. There's sort of like not a competitor to Cuba rum, but a whole separate entity that's also part of the Cuban government, but a different part of the Cuban government. And that it also has its own distilleries, and that there's actually 2 other branches, 2 other ministries of Cuba, which don't make rum, but they basically sell brands that are made by the other 2 branches. So it's incredibly complicated. And I was very fortunate that Cuban government and somebody in the Cuban government doesn't know a whole lot about where not to put documents on the internet. So I have some amazing spreadsheets that list like, here's the brands and here's which ministry of the government is responsible for it. I ferreted out a ton of information from like local Cuban newspaper articles that I translated from Spanish into English, connecting the dots on stuff. It was there where I kind of learned about the notion of what's it called? Flema, which is very common in Spanish heritage rum. We just, again, something we don't know about, but it's essentially, there are oftentimes just crude distilleries, if you will, that sometimes it makes more sense to literally just crudely distill your rum right next to the sugar mill. Like if you're a big, agro-industrial producer, like in Panama, for example, you can literally, and I'm not saying they do this per se, but they literally we can literally have picked molasses from the mill and basically run it through a still and get it to 90%, and then ship that instead of shipping molasses somewhere else to some other distillery to ferment distill. Like we can literally do that first pass of column distillation locally and then ship it to somewhere else to refine it and do the proper distillation to the right strengths or whatever. But essentially, it's like a pre-distillation and then they send it somewhere else. But that's phlegma. I had never heard this term before, but if you dig around on the Cuba rum site, you'll find an article referring to it. If you start going out, you literally, it's like you don't know what you don't know until you get that little thread.
Yeah.
And you start pulling and you're like, oh, well, okay, wow, this is interesting. So that's one of the traditions that it certainly makes sense that I learned about while writing the book. And I think very few people know about it.
So do you think there are going to be some Cuban rum industry veterans who find their way to your book and are reading through it and they're just kind of like, what the hell? How did he find out about this?
It's my hope.
Spanish curse words.
There's also an element of I hope there's some Cuban rum veterans who are industry veterans who contact me hey, I love what you're doing, but by the way, here's a list of things you got wrong.
Right.
Like, fantastic. Tell me what I got wrong.
Yeah.
So I can go correct it. There's a certain element, when you put together this many facts across so many countries, like, you're going to get something wrong. You're going to piss off somebody. Somebody's going to say that's not right. That's outdated. And all you can do is like, thank you for letting me know. And now I can do a second edition where this is all.
There you go.
But this is all like for my own. It's like, I want to know, I want as accurate information as I get. Sometimes the best way to get accurate information is put wrong information out there and see who responds to it.
I know you mentioned, there's sections in the book on rules, regulations. There's information on GIs and things like that. That's obviously a topic that's in, I want to say like the rum news, as if there's some sort of like online rum newspaper.
The headlines.
But that's a topic of conversation because, lots of different countries in recent years have been building on GIs or working on GIs, things like that. And we hear about that a lot. And one thing I'm curious about, because, I know there's tons of conversation about this in like the tequila and mezcal world of, how effective denominations of origin and things like that are. But I'm curious, after everything you've read about the development of GIs, do you have a process for like assessing how effective a GI is, or like how, as rum consumers, will we be able to weigh, the impact of a GI once it's been implemented and accepted by other governments and things like that?
Yeah, and it's a good question. And there's a lot that people don't understand about GIs. Things like, oh, if the GI says this, that means you can't do that. Do something outside of that. I think, the fundamental thing I will, and there's been talk like let's do an American rum GI,
right?
And things like that. And the first thing you have to realize is that GI is fundamentally intellectual property, intellectual property protection. And the first thing you need to say is like, do you have intellectual property? Like, what is your intellectual property you're protecting? So you can certainly say, Demerara rum, like that's a legacy. There's an expectation of Demerara rum. Same with Jamaican rum. And I'm not excluding anybody here. The point is that, you could, let's imagine that, pick a country like Sudan. Like Sudan starts making rum. We're like, oh, we're going to have a Sudan rum GI. Like, great. But really nobody has this expectation of what Sudanese rum is. So you can go do it. But it's sort of like, if it's not protecting your rum from people who want to compete based on your name, then it's not terribly useful there. That's a big part of it is what is it you're protecting? And this is where and I'm friends with many American producers, and I'm happy to help them wherever I can. We're sort of like, well, what is American rum? Right. Well, it's kind of all over the map. There's all these different things. And if you're like, well, we're going to protect all of it, well, then you're really not protecting
anything. Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's that aspect of it. Like another aspect, like people don't realize, is that basically any country can go make a GI. Like Canada could declare, I have a rum GI tomorrow, but it doesn't matter outside of Canada unless you can get somebody else. Like, sure, you can control it within your country, but if the EU doesn't recognize it, somebody can go sell a hypothetical Canadian rum in Europe, and you have there's no sort of oversight or authority to stop that.
Just like with agricole in the American market.
Yeah, exactly. It's been happening with agricole in the American market. That where agricole is protected, the terminology is protected in the EU, but not in America. So that's an aspect, again, that people don't realize. Like Jamaica, I love Jamaican rum, I will support them, but they have a GI, but that GI is not recognized in the EU yet, and I hope it will be, nor is it recognized in the United States. So yes, they have a GI, but it's really only legally impacting, their enforcement within Jamaica.
Yeah.
And then, I think with the context of the Barbados GI, we're not going to get into politics of it too much, but you're like, it's been 3 or 4 years already. And you're like, if you saw the history of these various GIs, you see like 3 years is nothing. Martinique started started the process for GI circa 19, it's either 70 or 76.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it was the 70s.
It was a 25-year process.
Wow.
Yeah.
The DR just got a GI this year, and that started 2014. So it's been 8 years for the Dominican Republic to get a job. It took, I'm not kidding you, it took Demerara or Guyana 6 years to get a GI. And there's one producer.
Yeah.
Okay, 6 years to get the GI and get it registered in the EU. There's one producer.
Yeah.
Same with Guatemala. So like these things take a very long time and a sort of expectation that like, well, everybody agrees on this. Like, why can't we have it right now? It's just not, it's not consistent with history.
And then you have even longer before the other shoe drops, which is convincing other governments to recognize, codify, enforce it, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
and the EU acceptance is critical. That so the EU has their own like EU, and then the countries in the EU, particularly France, are very good at this. They have lots and lots of GIs.
Right.
So they have very high standards and specific criteria, and they have committees that review this stuff. And they kick stuff back all the time because they're like, no, like this is just isn't consistent with what we're doing here. So you can have it locally, but if you want it to be recognized in the EU, it needs to be consistent with how the EU describes the rules and regulations.
Yeah, it seems as if the process we have in the United States is not quite as formalized, a bit more abstract for how you go about getting the government to notice your thing.
It's sort of like, it's kind of like, can you convince the TTB to consider it, and then TTB puts it out for public approval
commentary,
for commentary, and then nothing.
And then they ignore all the commentary. And then you're like,
did they approve it? Did they not? I don't know. It's literally it's opaque. It's
been I've been halfway paying attention to the whole American single malt thing that's going on. It was really interesting to read some of the TTB's kind of initial info they put out on that recently, and that's something that's that's within the United States that it's coming from as well.
Yeah.
So
exactly. Yeah. I mean that's been a multi-year process. So like I'm not dismissing GIs at all. I love talking about them. I think they're great. But again, there's a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of like, why can't we just have this? It all seems to make sense, kind of mentality right now.
Going back a little you talked a little bit about photos. Do you have any favorite photos from this book that just immediately come to mind when you start thinking about them? Like, oh, I can't wait for people to see this.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of them are from Grenada.
Rivers Antoine.
Yeah, no, I mean I love the River Antoine ones, but no, it's just the pictures of like the sugarcane fields, the Cane Coast stuff. I mean, that day I spent going around, just like literally we spent the entire day going from cane field to cane field, and
that's with Renegade, right?
Yeah, and that's with Renegade, and the sky was just the perfect blue, and the cane was the right size, and great green color to it. It was just like I captured so many things. Like I wanted to have a whole book of these photos, and I'm sure they'd be happy if I did that. But there was a lot of tension. Like Carrie's like, okay, there's already dozens of cane field photos in this book. How many more do we need? Like, we need more. Other ones like foam, brown foam. It's brown foam. I'm like, yes, but this is different brown foam here. Can't you see the difference in the brown foam? Like, it's just brown foam. And then she'd want to make it, she'd be like, okay, fine. We're going to use the photo. It's going to go in like a little small square. I'm like, no, it's full page, clearly.
I need full page brown foam.
Yeah, we have to see the bubble circumference.
Exactly. And so, yes, there's a few full page photos. But yeah, there are definitely, some pictures where some people who have seen the book go like, wow, that's an amazing photo. I'm like, I'm proud that I took that. And a lot of it was sort of behind the scene. Like I had to teach myself how to really use Lightroom. Like I played around with Lightroom before, but now at some point you have neither the images, like editing, and like, learning as you're going along. By the time you're halfway through, you're like, I'm much better at this. Now I kind of want to go back and start. No, gotta keep going. Yeah, because I'll still never finish.
Now the next book can be your personal guide, your how-to guide to Adobe Lightroom.
yeah, exactly. So much I learned there, and just how do you manage all those photos? How do you
right?
How do you and sort of in the beginning it was like, oh, okay, we're gonna have lots of photos, and so we get to like say Mount Gay was the first chapter or first story she laid out. And there were, I don't know, like 25 photos in there. And at some point we're like, honey, I think we're making the book way too big. And so, over the time, as we went.
Narrow down.
Okay, fine. No more than like 10 pictures for the story unless there's a really great reason. But we still, even then, we have to go back and look at, okay, we've got some pages here.
Yeah.
And we were able to go back, like, okay, fine, take this one out and this one out, and kind of balance it out a little bit more. But tracking those photos, who took the photo, what size is the photo, what page does the photo go on, all this, that was an enormous amount of effort that I did not estimate. It's very different, than writing a blog post. You're like, oh, then grab that photo list and then here. And we're done. That's what we're out.
Yeah.
So, Matt, when we do our research for the show, it seems like inevitably we end up on a Cocktail Wonk article, and it's a wealth. It's a wealth of knowledge, and clearly you are one of those people who is leading an effort here on rum knowledge in a lot of ways. I know that there are others, so I kind of wanted to ask you, who do you look to as another authority or in awe of regarding knowledge of rum?
So the two people who I'm very fortunate to, A, be able to call friends, and B, work very hard to earn and maintain their trust. One is Vaughn from WIRSPA, Vaughn Remlo WIRSPA, who knows an incredible amount. He's been doing this job since 2001, dealing with basically a member organization with like 30 different distilleries. 30, I should know that. But he's incredible and knowledgeable and insightful about rum. And the other one is Karsten from E&A Shear.
Yeah.
Like literally his job to go around and tour the distilleries to see, like, are we going to buy this rum or what have you? So those are my, those are my two sources where I'm like, okay, I'm not going to pester them day to day with stuff. I'm like, okay, if I have something very well defined and I know pretty much nobody else is going to have the answer, then I will go to them and say, by the way, so.
Yeah.
Put in a favor. Yeah.
On that note, you mentioned Vaughn, who's the CEO, right? That's the correct title.
CEO of WIRSPA.
Yeah, CEO of WIRSPA. You mentioned earlier that you are the community envoy for WIRSPA. And I wanted to ask, how has working with them kind of changed the way you or I guess I shouldn't lead the question. Once you've had the opportunity to work closely with an organization like that, are there things that you see differently about the rum industry as a whole now? Or how has that kind of influenced your thinking?
Oh, yeah. I mean, great question. Big thing is that most enthusiasts, at least when you're starting out, you're going to focus on what rum do I like? Like what bottles do I want to have? And maybe how those bottles are made. You don't really need to think about the business of rum. You don't really think about, is this producer going to survive or are they viable? Like maybe I'll have this rum, but will they be here 2 years from now because they went under? So working with WIRSPA is sort of like, is like literally behind the scenes, that you literally sort of like, the wizard, we'll say the Wizard of Oz, but literally you go behind you like, oh, I see so much more about the rum industry and can connect dots that I didn't even know existed. But you hear about things like, right now there's serious molasses shortage and the stores are having to sometimes can't get enough molasses. And you're like, groups of them are collaborating together to do a group buy of molasses to ensure, place a big enough order to where they can get it and figure out where they can store it. Another thing is, for example, we've seen a little bit of this, but it hasn't made a whole lot of news, is that the World Health Organization has basically made suggestions that basically like all drinking whatsoever should be discouraged. And we're simplifying it. But basically suggesting governments like you should kind of treat alcohol the way you're treating like tobacco, like seriously discourage it, put like graphic images and labels like this what happens. And like literally around the world, all these different spirit producer organizations are like, no, that's a little too draconian. Let us, like we know our market well, let us figure out how to target the worst issues rather than having sort of like blanket one size fits all. And so all of these producers, be it whiskey producers or branding producers, they're all sort of like, hold on, back up here. We need to think about this and show that we can self-regulate more effectively. And that's something that WIRSPA, and it's the Responsible Drinking Initiative, has been sort of leading that within the Caribbean rum space. Like, hey, this is important. This will be impacted from this. Another great example I just learned about recently is there's an initiative from basically the Caribbean, the CARICOM, the Organization of Caribbean Countries, to encourage, like, stop importing so much stuff, like use locally made products. And amongst those things, like, oh yeah, it should be using locally made glass. Like, why are you importing glass bottles? You can use local Caribbean made glass, which sounds like a good idea, except the Caribbean only has one glass factory.
Yeah. That
one glass factory is Trinidad and doesn't make sort of the super high-end nice bottles. And so, this organization is pushing this sort of idea through of, like, let's basically jack up taxes on imported bottles so that Caribbean countries will use their locally made glass. But the Caribbean producers who are using premium glass are like, we can't get enough glass in this factory. B, like, it's not the quality we need them to be. And so again, we're supposed to sort of working sort of like as the representative of these Caribbean, rum makers to say, like, hey, we have a particular special need here. We have other ways we can help solve this, or we can make progress on that issue. But you will basically kill us if it gets implemented like that. So I mean, big picture is you see much more of the behind the scenes challenges that the rum producers face and how they work around them, or how they collectively work together on them.
Do you ever, you mentioned the molasses shortage. Do you ever worry about molasses?
I mean, it doesn't wake me up at night, but yeah.
Every now and then, I hear producers talk about it, and, you just think big picture, the way the sugar industry goes, their mission is not to make molasses. And sometimes I just, I worry a little bit about the future of molasses rum.
Yeah, I mean, that's a theme I've started pushing lately. And there's actually a part of a chapter in the book. There's like a sort of looking forward chapter. And I talked about this in Miami at Rum Congress. It's essentially change as, if you had to put it in one line, it would be cane juice is the future of rum.
Yeah.
It's not so much that all rum producers are going to start using cane juice, but the Caribbean in particular needs to sort of start moving away from this model of, like, we depend on our locally made molasses supply, which is readily available and so inexpensive that it's not a big deal. Basically, that's no longer true. No other spirit category uses the after or the byproduct of some other process.
Right.
That if you're growing wheat to make a whiskey, then 100% of that wheat's material goes into making whiskey. And if you're growing grapes to make brandy, 100% of that grape juice goes into making brandy. It's only rum that's sort of like, we grow the sugar and then we take out 85% of the sugar to sell as table sugar and make the remaining 50%. They're like, well, this is what we're going to make rum from.
Right.
Like, we need to get away from that mindset, that model. And so even if you're not going to make rum from cane juice, you can at least grow the sugar and devote all of that to making rum. And so you're seeing that, for example, cane syrup. Like, you can, even if you don't have to use molasses, you can use cane syrup. You can literally mix cane juice, remove enough water to where it's stable, and then distill year round. So even, again, you can make a molasses rum to cane syrup. But again, you're using 100% of the sugar for making rum. And that's one place where, I'd say, Spanish heritage countries are way ahead of, like, the English heritage countries. The Barbados, Jamaica, Trinidad, Guyana. They have, some of them have some industry, but the Barbados sugar industry can't yet supply enough Barbados molasses for rum making. Same with Guyana is having to import molasses. Jamaica is having to import a lot of molasses. Whereas you get into, like, Panama, Venezuela, wherever, Dominican Republic, I think even, they're like, we grow sugar to make this rum. And so they don't have this problem. Like, they're not necessarily making cane juice rum, but they're making it into cane syrup and storing it like molasses. And so I think we're going to, more and more we're going to see producers, at least the big producers, saying we need to be in control more of our source material pipeline.
Right.
We can no longer just depend that we can call up ED&F Man or some other molasses broker and expect that a quality molasses will arrive, at the time frame we need it. So I think that's going to be, I'm not saying all rum is going to become cane juice in 10 years, but I'm saying the industry is starting to shift towards all of the cane going to rum. And I think the fact that we're seeing prices rise in rum sort of is making that viable. That is sort of like, finally, the rum we can make from the sugar cane is more valuable than the table sugar.
Yeah, exactly.
It's an economic change. This is a big picture thought that I'm starting to put out there.
Well, speaking of prognostication, you sat down with the Rum Lab, I think it was September of 2015, and you answered their classic question, where do you see the rum industry 5 years from now?
Oh, my.
You said that you felt rum was at a crossroads then, and the quote, the question is, will good, honest rum be able to convey their story so that consumers demand them, or will mass-produced, adulterated rums crowd them out, end quote. So, it's 7 years later. Do you think we're in a different place, or are we still stuck at that intersection?
I wish I could answer differently, but I still think, we are at that. We're still at that intersection. I think, we have made progress towards more people wanting and demanding good rum. Mm-hmm. We have far more choices now versus 2015. If you look at all the crazy independent bottled rums and the port cask impressions, all that kind of stuff, we're definitely made progress there in having a much greater variety of good rums. However, I think we're still seeing there's a lot of education left to do, because there's still a lot of rums that, I won't name, but we can think of who they are, who are selling more of a story and a vision rather than, a tall tale and some too much sweetening and flavoring, whatever, and not really making an honest rum. And I think there's a lot of challenges there is that there are people who maybe a little bit of sweetening, a little bit of flavoring or whatever is part of their tradition. It goes back 100 years. And that's very different from like, hey, never did this before, but we can buy these 7 chemicals and throw in the rum and sell it. There's a difference there. It's not a black and white issue. It's shades of gray. And I think that's hard for people to understand, especially if they're new coming into the space. So I wish I could give a better answer that we're past that crossroads. But I still think, as rum popularity goes up, you're going to get more people like wanting to take advantage of the popularity.
Right. So. Well, to your point, there might be a little bit more gray now than there was before. Mm-hmm. And by that, I mean, it's not as quite black and white. I think there is a little bit more of a spectrum now, but that is a good thing that people are maybe, hopefully, as you said, shifting towards what we want to see in the market and more honest rum. So,
and I think, it's a lot of what I do. A lot of my writing is trying to learn as much as I can, put it out there, educate people so that those people can in turn educate more people to at least what questions do you want to ask? What are you seeking out here instead of just depending on what the producer says?
Yeah. When you were just talking about your involvement with WIRSPA and kind of seeing behind the curtain and everything being in the background, you've got all that going on. You've got this other side of things where you're working on the book, you're doing all this research. And, if we go back to the beginning of what got you into this, it was just like the pure enjoyment of rum. And so I wanted to ask a little bit of just, in terms of just pure enjoyment for you right now, like what do you find yourself reaching for when you just, you're not trying to be overly analytical about rum. You just want something tasty to relax with. Is there a certain category? I kind of go through phases personally with that. Is there a particular category right now, or maybe an individual distillery or specific bottles that you find yourself reaching for a lot lately? What has your attention right now?
It's a good question. I'm very fortunate that, which the viewers can't or the listeners can't see this, but I have my entire rum collection.
You've got options.
8 feet of me in my office. So sometimes I'll be like, okay, I want to sip on something. I had to literally pivot in my chair and go what do I feel like? And it's this very sort of gut feel. I was like, this, and I have it. There's not, I feel like, I'm not saying I've had every rum ever known to man, but I feel like I have a pretty good grasp on the styles of rum and what they're going to like. And so I'm not like, okay, right now I'm in a Jamaican phase, or right now I'm in a Haitian rum phase. A lot of it just happens to be like, okay, what bottles arrived most recently? Okay, I'm going to try them before I put them on the shelf and forget about them.
Right.
It happens right now. That happens to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, probably 15 bottles on my desk that are like calling me like, open me now, try me now. I will say, and might surprise people, is like, I love Jamaican rum. I love Demerara rum. I love Port Morant. I love the aged agricoles and Echo Blancs. But sometimes, and Mrs. Wolf, Carrie's the same way. Sometimes it's like a good Spanish heritage rum. It's not, I don't have to wrestle with it. And sometimes just good. Sometimes, some Don Q, or like a Bacardi 10, or like I've got some lovely Botran on my desk right now. Sometimes I just want something that's like, I can enjoy it and I know it for what it is. And, and it's fine. Like I think of all the rums as like my children. Like I love them all. It's not like, well, you're my child or whatever. Like I love them all.
And I will drink you tonight.
Exactly. So yeah, like you said, I certainly love the Jamaicans. It's one of the, interesting thing is the Long Pond ITP 15, the one from Long Pond, is polarizing. Some people say it's too expensive and it should be higher strength, and I wish it was higher strength. But like, I love that. Like that rum is sort of like, it's a Jamaican that has everything I want in a Jamaican, but I don't need to wrestle with it to enjoy it. And I also love the Port Morant. Like there's something about the Port Morant notes. That the single cask Port Morants, and I still need to get the single cask Port Morants. And you said cask strength Port Morant, but I'm like, I'm just tapped. Someday have Port Morant. It's just a happy rum, and I know this sort of like some of it's like Royal Navy, like that's the rum that the Royal Navy was buying. I have the records of that.
Right. No, Long Pond ITP is a good one where the bottle for me recently that became one of those rums that I could just like enjoy it at any time was the one that Impex did. They did a 13-year ITP, right. And that one was really in the sweet spot for me. Well, there's one more thing I wanted to ask you. Oh yeah, obviously you've traveled to tons of these places in the book, but I assume there are some places that you have not gotten to yet. So I wanted to ask a 2-part question, which is, one, what is the number one location you haven't been to yet that is at the top of your list of where you want to go? And then part 2 of the question is, of all the places you've already been, what's at the top of your list of where you want to go back to? Like if you could immediately transport yourself to one place you've already been, what would it be? And then the new place you've never been to, what would it be?
So I'll answer them in reverse order. I've only been to Guadalupe for a short time, but I just know it just looks magical. And there's so many distilleries there. I think that's the chapter in the book that has the most distilleries in it. Like I want to go hang out in Guadalupe for several weeks and just see it all. It kills me. Like I have great photos of it. And then there was that group that went to Guadalupe, like 150 people were in Guadalupe a couple of months ago. And I'm like, it kills me. I want to do that. And because I just now have a much better understanding of it than I started. In terms of where I've yet to been, I've been to the biggest ones that, I've knocked off, Barbados, Jamaica, Trinidad, Guyana, the French have, covered that. I'm sort of limiting it to the Caribbean.
Mm-hmm. Have you been to St. Lucia yet?
I've been to St. Lucia.
Okay.
St. Lucia. I think that, believe it or not, what I would really love to do is where the biggest gap I have is having been to Puerto Rico and Cuba. I certainly have a good grasp of that style, but I've yet to be anywhere in like Central America or like South America. So like Venezuela, Panama, Nicaragua, Guatemala. I'm like at some point we're just going to figure out how to get me down there, and we're just going to travel the Pan American Highway or something and like really go see all of them.
There you go.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the photos from Florida Canyon and the volcano are just stunning. So yeah, I mean, it sounds crazy, but yeah, I want to, understand that style better and be able to compare and contrast it against Puerto Rico and Cuba. And I would like, I would love to return to Cuba and see more of it, because very few people make it to Cuba and are able to see something.
Right.
And now I know I saw one very small slice of it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there's certainly no wrong answer to that question. Speaking of questions to which there are no wrong answers, we've come to the point of the interview where we transition to a tradition on the Rumcast, which is the rapid fire round of questions, which I warned you about in advance. You were not given the questions in advance, however, so these will come as a surprise. Have you prepared yourself for this? Are you mentally ready? Are you in a good space to think on your feet and go quickly?
I'm ready. Bring it on.
All right, jumping in. He's like, yeah, let's do it.
So basically I'm going to put 60 seconds and John's going to take you through as many of these as he can get you through.
Give me a go, Will. Let's do this.
All right. 60 seconds and go.
All right, neat or on the rocks?
Neat.
Column, pot, or blend?
Pot.
Molasses or cane juice?
Ooh, tough one. I love them both, so
It's a tough one.
I can't pick.
All right, aged or unaged?
Oh, I'll a good one. Aged.
Okay.
Well, the disappointment.
You
of the
know,
Yeah,
answer.
it's like you're sad about
Aged.
aged. Your current favorite rum distillery?
Oh, Lord. That's about DDL.
Okay.
Nice.
Windows 95 or Windows 98, Matt?
95.
Got to be 95. It's a classic.
It's a classic. All right. Is it true, Matt, that you registered the web domain mocktailwonk.com just in case you ever decide to quit drinking?
No, but now I'm going to go do that.
Get the domain
Immediately.
name now.
I have a few interesting domain names if you know where to look.
Oh, all right. Name someone you could sit and talk deep rum stuff with for hours, other than us, of course.
Yeah. Oh, Lord. Sean Caleb, I could certainly talk with for hours, but I just love John George's from Trinidad. Like his
Yeah.
Ah,
and he has the wisdom and the insight.
He's so friendly. I've only met him briefly online a couple of times, and he was so nice.
And he's so knowledgeable. And they want somebody who has that perspective. We can talk technology and rum making, but also a history of it. Stuff.
yeah.
So, yeah.
Two people we need to get on the podcast.
That's right. Yeah.
All right.
Move it along, John.
All right. All right.
God, I don't even know. I don't know who has. Like, I feel like I'm the last person I know of on this podcast. I don't actually know he's got
There are
on.
more. There are more.
The most underrated rum cocktail.
Underrated. Oh God. I'm drawing a blank on the name of it. Hotel
Why it's so
Nacional.
underrated.
Oh yeah, Hotel Nacional.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah, that's a good one.
And finally, you travel a ton and have an extensive software engineering background. Is the Cocktail Wonk persona actually just a cover for you to secretly operate as an international hacker or spy for the NSA?
Yes.
Okay. Well, my next question was if it were the case, would you tell us? But clearly you answered that as well.
So
So
you just blew your cover, and that's
Yeah.
time. So
I did.
yeah, we almost called time before you revealed your true identity, but unfortunately now the world knows the truth.
Oh well. I found more rum. Enjoy it.
Well,
Yeah.
Matt, we made it to the end. Obviously, we're going to share with people in the show notes links where they can find the book and everything. Do you want to share a preferred method for people to find the book, to order the book? How do they get it?
So we haven't exactly figured out precisely out yet, but definitely like we have a domain name based upon the title. But the book will actually be on Shopify. So at some point, what you'll see is our Shopify store will at some point going from saying Minimalist Tiki, it'll be like, here's our books. Minimalist
There you
Tiki, Caribbean Rum. So the website now has already been renamed. So if you go to Wonk Press right now, it will look like Minimalist Tiki did before, but at some point Wonk Press, it's now Wonk Press is the site, and it will soon have a second book, and then hopefully in not too longer I'll have books number 3 and 4, but we can't talk about those yet.
we'll have to have you back. Yeah.
I'm assuming you have ideas for those, maybe outlines.
They're maybe not even something I've written. So
Okay.
yes, yeah, we have some things up our sleeves. So
Okay. Very
Cool.
exciting.
Yeah.
We'll have to check back in on that. Well, before we go, we talked about a lot of stuff. Is there anything we didn't get to? Anything else you want to share with the people out there?
no, the only thing I forgot to mention this is also we're sort of not rebranding. We're extending the branding. So basically, going forward, there will be Cocktail Wonk, Rum Wonk, and Wonk Press.
Okay.
Okay.
But basically, Wonk Press is the publishing company, and Carrie will head more of that. Cocktail Wonk will see more of my cocktail related content, obviously, because that's where people still go there more for cocktail stuff. The the tiki stuff outperforms the rum stuff. But then Rum Wonk is, there's been a Rum Wonk Instagram for a while there. It's out there. But I forgot to mention, and I'm not promoting it yet, but I think by the time we publish this or put this up, I'll be talking about it. So I have the Substack as well.
Oh, really?
Substack. And so, the Substack will be, Rum Wonk with Matt Pietrek. But the Substack is essentially like, okay, I will no longer need to be able to point people like, go read this article on Cocktail Wonk. It'll be like Modern Caribbean Rum, page 34,
right,
or whatever. And so with the Substack, I can do rummy topics. Assuming like, okay, if you subscribe to this, you must like rum, so I don't need to explain it quite as much.
Right,
so I can sort of like really go into, quickly get into sort of like newsy topics or news topics or history or whatever, like literally like whatever my brain wants to put out there, and I don't want to have to do like an epic 2,000 word cocktail post to sort of like
just quickly write it up, send it to people.
Quickly get it down. So like, for example, I've already done a deep dive on the history of 151. It's different than Lance's history of 151, but also why 151. We actually do have a explanation, and it's sort of like the prehistory of 151, that kind of stuff. Or it's like, oh, it's kind of fun. I researched some stuff. I learned some stuff. Write it, put it up there, not super formal, and hopefully do a faster pace with a wide variety of topics instead of Cocktail Wonk being like, here's 7,000 words on Never Distiller. So
this is like the Wonk extended universe, like the MCU, but it's your stuff.
The Wonk universe, I like it.
yeah. So like I said, we're sort of splitting up. It was finally time, and I'll be honest, I felt for like, as I gain more respect, rum producers, whatever, and like, so when talking to you about this, you're like, by the way, I'm Cocktail Wonk. It's sort of, there's a little bit of a disconnect there. Embrace the rum side of it as well. So
there you go.
Yeah.
This is why I love the Rumcast. This is why I wanted you guys to get sort of like the first interview, because you do such a great job covering it without being overly formal. So
you were part of setting the standard for in-depth rum content. So we aspire to do the same in our own way here on the Rumcast.
Thank you.
Well, awesome. Everyone go check out Matt's book. I know I'm really looking forward to getting my hands on it. Matt shared a PDF of select pages with me, and the photos are truly amazing, and I know the content is going to be even better. So I'm really excited to dig into it, and thanks again for joining us and taking us behind the scenes, Matt.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's my pleasure to be here, and always good to talk with you guys.
All right, everyone. Thank you again for listening. As we said, please do go check out Matt's new book, Modern Caribbean Rum. We'll have links to that in the show notes where you can order it and buy it. And, as we covered in the show, it's all self-published and everything. So when you buy it, that money is going directly to the people who had a hand in actually creating it, which is really cool. So we'll put up links to that. If you have any questions for us, as always, we'd love to hear from you at host@rumcast.com. You can email us there, or you can also find us on social media. John, where can they find us?
Yeah, we're all over social media, all over the interwebs, at Instagram at the Rumcast. We're also on Facebook, the Rumcast, and Twitter. We don't do as much on Twitter, I'm going to be honest, but we're there. We still post, our episode releases. But if you're really trying to get a hold of us through social media and direct message on Facebook or Instagram, that's fine also, and we will get to those as soon as we can. And also, if you like what you're hearing, if you're interested in hearing more, of course, you can join our Patreon effort. So
that's right.
we do have the Patreon effort going, patreon.com/the Rumcast. Is that right?
I like that you said forward slash.
Forward slash? Is that like a vestigial?
I don't even know if it's / or /, but it's the slash you use in web addresses.
It's one of the two slashes. Just try both, and if one works, there you go. It's one of the slashes. Yeah,
patreon.com/the Rumcast. We're doing monthly happy hours. We're doing bonus episodes and fun stuff like that. So if you want more, if you want to support the show, that's the place to do it. And, I was thinking about this earlier. If you're still listening, I don't know how long into the outro people generally listen, but one thought, it's getting to be the end of the year. I don't know about you, John, but I'm starting to go through and trying to, write down some of the more notable rums I've had throughout the year. I'm trying to prepare for the whole end of year episode we do. And I'd love to hear from all the listeners out there, what are some of the most memorable rums you were able to try this year in terms of what's really stood out to you? It can be new, it can be something that's old that you just had for the first time. Would love to hear stories about that. So if you'd like to share, feel free to message us on any of the social platforms or send us an email at host@rumcast.com. It'd be great to hear that stuff. But John, I think that'll about do it for this episode. What do you say? Is it time to call this one done?
I think we will see everybody in 2 weeks or hear everybody in 2 weeks. So we don't even hear them because we just talk and they listen. We will see you listen in 2 weeks.
Sounds like we're watching them in their homes.
All right, everybody. Yeah. Well, thank you so much again, and you'll hear from us in 2 weeks' time.
That's good.
Wait, I got one more thing. You have to record again, just in case.
Okay.
So, Matt, every time I see your name, I think to myself Star Trek because your name ends in Trek. Are you a Trekkie by any chance?
Not really. I mean, I think I've watched all the original episodes.
Darn.
John's so disappointed right now.
But you know what? Here's how when people can't spell my name, I said Pietrek. I love pies. I'm always on a trek to the next pie. So.
All right. Well, this is totally not going to work for you then, but I'm still going to tell you because I spent so much time on it that I think a great intro for your website, you could put this on there, would be the following. You ready for it? Okay.
Ready.
It goes like this. It's rum, the final spirit frontier. These are the voyages of the Cocktail Wonk.
I like it.
His continuing mission to explore strange, new rums, to seek out new distilleries and new sugarcane varietals, to boldly write with an incredible amount of detail about rum things that no one has ever done before.
I love it.
Pietrek.
Is that supposed to mirror something from Star Trek that we're supposed to recognize?
Are you serious right now? Really? Wow.
I didn't watch Star Trek.
Am I the only Trekkie? Oh, you guys. Oh, well.